On a cold, quiet morning in upstate New York, a farmer walked into his cornfield and straight into a nightmare that would not end for more than 3 decades. For years, this girl did not have a name. She was known only by the place where she was found, a small rural community that could not forget her, no matter how much time passed. This is the story of a teenager whose life was cut short on a lonely roadside, how she became one of America's most haunting Jane Does, and how a stubborn sheriff, a grieving sister, and an internet stranger finally pulled her out of the dark. You are watching Disturbed Intent. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All the things I spend my nights digging into, and if you are here, I know you do too. You strange, curious, brilliantly twisted mind. Before we jump into this case, take a second to support the channel. It genuinely helps keep these stories alive. Please like this video, drop a comment to share your thoughts and theories, and if you have not already, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive from Disturbed Intent. Alright, buckle up. Or, actually, unbuckle your seatbelt, because we are about to go metaphorically flying through the windshield and straight into one of the most heartbreaking cold cases in American history. This is the case of the girl once known only as Caledonia Jane Doe. The story begins in the late 1970s. On a brisk autumn morning in early November, in a small farming community near the village of Caledonia in upstate New York, the fields were slick with mud. A steady night of rain had turned the soil to dark, heavy sludge and weighed down the corn stalks. A local farmer headed out to check his fields. From a distance, he saw a splash of red in the rows of corn just off United States Route 20. He thought it might be a hunter in a red jacket who had wandered onto his property and laid down. As he walked closer, the shape did not move. The red was not a jacket tossed on a stump, it was clothing on a body. A young girl lay face down among the flattened stalks. She was not breathing, she was not moving, there was no identification. The farmer rushed back and called the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. With that one phone call, he set in motion a mystery that would outlive entire careers, outlast the technology of the time, and only find its answer when old-school detective work finally collided with modern forensics and internet sleuths. When deputies arrived that morning, later recorded as early November of 1979, they found the girl lying 20 or so feet off the road, in the muddy cornfield. She was fully clothed. She looked young, a teenager, or very young adult. What they saw told them instantly this was no accident. She had been shot twice. One wound was near her right eye. The other was in her upper back. The blood pattern at the edge of the road and the drag marks into the field suggested a grim sequence. She had likely been shot once near the roadside, then dragged into the cornfield and shot again while she was down. Her pants pockets were turned inside out, as if someone had gone through them, stripping away any money, any wallet, anything that could say who she was. There was no purse, no bag, no identifying document. Beneath her body, investigators found a single bullet slug from what was believed to be a .38 caliber handgun. It was one of the few solid pieces of physical evidence they recovered. The weather had not been kind to them. Heavy rain had pounded the area overnight. Any footprints in that soft earth were likely washed away. Any tire tracks near the shoulder of the road were smeared into unrecognizable smudges. In 1979, no one was routinely collecting microscopic DNA the way they do now. Even if they had tried, that storm would have destroyed most of whatever the killer left behind. Still, investigators did what they could. They secured the scene. They walked the field and roadside, collecting anything that did not belong. They photographed the body and surroundings. They took the slug. Then they focused on the girl herself. She was small, around 5 feet 3 inches tall and roughly 120 pounds. Her hair was shoulder length, wavy, light brown, with older highlights growing out at the roots. Her eyes were a soft brown. Her skin stopped everyone for a moment. She was deeply tanned. On her shoulders and upper body, she had clear tan lines in the shape of a halter top or bikini. Sharp tan lines, the kind you get from being out in real sun, often. In the late 1970s, tanning salons were not common, and upstate New York in late autumn is not beach weather. Those tan lines did not come from a local lake in October. They strongly suggested that, not long before she died, this girl had been living or spending time in a much warmer, sunnier place. Her clothes were practical and ordinary for a teenager in that era. tan corduroy pants, a multicolored plaid button-up shirt, and over it, a bright red windbreaker with black stripes down the sleeves. Inside that jacket was a label from an automotive sports company, likely some kind of promotional racing jacket. Investigators tried to track it, but it was too generic to tie to one person. On her feet were brown shoes with ripple soles, blue knee-high socks, and underneath, a white bra and blue underwear. Nothing screamed luxury or designer, just everyday clothing. Two small items did stand out. Attached to her belt loops were two metal keychains. One was a heart with a tiny keyhole, and the inscription, "He who holds the key can open my heart." The other was the matching key. They were the kind of cheap but sentimental trinkets you find in vending machines at highway rest stops. Investigators eventually traced them back to machines along the New York State Thruway, the major east-west highway cutting across the state. Those keychains suggested that the girl had been traveling along that highway not long before her death, probably picking up the little heart and key as a road trip souvenir. The other notable item was a delicate silver necklace with 3 small turquoise stones. It had a handmade, southwestern look, similar to Native American-style jewelry you might see in Arizona, New Mexico, or parts of Texas. That necklace was unusual for rural western New York, and paired with the tan lines, it reinforced an early suspicion. This girl might have come from somewhere far to the south or west. At the coroner's office, a full autopsy confirmed what was already clear. She had died from massive internal bleeding caused by the 2 gunshot wounds. The shot to the head appeared to be fired at close range. The one to her back looked like it had been fired after she was already on the ground. One quietly chilling detail. There were no signs that she had flinched or turned away before the headshot. It suggested she had been taken entirely by surprise. In her stomach, the coroner found partially digested potatoes, sweet corn, and ham, a simple diner meal. From digestion, it appeared she had eaten not long before she died. Not far from the field, in a town called Lima, there was a small diner. A waitress there heard about the murder and came forward with a memory that immediately haunted her. On a night in early November of 1979, around 11:30 at night, a teenage girl had come in with an older man. The man paid. The girl did not seem panicked. They looked like any other pair of late-night road-weary customers. Only later, seeing coverage of the unidentified girl, did the waitress realize that the teenager she had served, eating potatoes, corn, and ham, was almost certainly the same girl now lying in a cold field less than an hour later. From this waitress, investigators got a sketch of the man. She remembered him as a white male, average height, perhaps 5'8" or 5'9", with curly hair and black wire-rimmed glasses. He drove a tan station wagon that night. He instantly became a person of interest, the last known person to see the victim alive. Detectives put together a composite sketch, circulated bulletins about the man and his tan station wagon, and went back through truck stops, diners, and gas stations along the thruway and surrounding routes. They asked everyone they could find if they remembered a curly-haired teen girl traveling with a bespectacled man in a tan wagon. A few long-haul truckers thought they might have seen a girl like her hitchhiking along the highway. Some believed they had given rides to a similar teenager around that autumn. A theory began to form. This girl might have been hitchhiking, maybe a runaway or traveler, and she accepted a ride from someone who seemed safe. But for all their efforts, detectives were missing the most basic piece: her name. They combed through missing person reports. They checked teen girls reported missing in New York and surrounding states. They sent her fingerprints to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Nothing. She had never been fingerprinted in any way that showed up in federal systems. No scars, tattoos, or healed fractures they could match to hospital records. Her teeth told a quieter story. Multiple untreated cavities. One tooth decayed almost to the roots. A little bit of dental work that looked unusual, possibly done outside the United States or in a very low-income clinic. No braces, no extensive fillings, nothing distinctive enough to point to a particular dentist. With no identifications and no matching missing person report, the girl in the red jacket became Jane Doe. About a year after her death, with no family stepping forward, Livingston County arranged for her burial in Greenmount Cemetery in Dansville. Local people helped pay for it. She was laid to rest under a simple stone that read, "Lest we forget, unidentified girl, November 1979, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." A small group attended her funeral: law enforcement officers, a few townspeople who had never met her, but felt, on some level, responsible for her. One of those officers was a deputy named John York. Standing over the grave of a girl with no name, York made a quiet promise to himself: she would not be forgotten. Years went by. York was eventually elected sheriff. Other cases came across his desk, some solved, some not. But this one, this unknown girl in the cornfield, stayed with him. He visited her grave. He kept her photo on his wall. He made sure her case file never got buried in a cabinet. He told his deputies, "You do not think that kid deserves some justice?" The case became the most extensive and expensive investigation in the county's history. Thousands of tips came in over the years. Flyers were mailed all over the United States, into Canada, even overseas. Whenever a teenage girl went missing, and the description was even close, they checked. Her dental records were sent everywhere. Her clothing, jewelry, and that bullet slug were preserved carefully, even as the decades turned. But without a name, without a confirmed hometown, the hunt for her killer kept stalling. Meanwhile, in another state, people who loved a girl named Tammy assumed she had simply run away and never come back. They did not know that strangers had buried her, that an entire community in New York had quietly adopted her memory. Time marched on. The 1980s and 1990s passed. Technology changed. By the early 2000s, detectives were taking a harder look at her story. Could her killer have been one of the many serial predators traveling the country in that era? In the early 1980s, a man named Henry Lee Lucas was confessing to huge numbers of murders. At one point, he claimed he had killed a girl in a cornfield in New York, which sounded eerily similar. Investigators interviewed him, checked his story, and discovered what many other departments were finding. Lucas was an attention seeker, repeating details he had been fed, or simply inventing things. He could not provide any specifics about the Caledonia case that were not already public. His confession was rejected as not credible. Another name that came up was Christopher Wilder, sometimes called the Beauty Queen Killer, who in the 1980s abducted and murdered young women across several states. He had ties to both Florida and New York, and he liked cars and racing. Some wondered if the red racing-style jacket on the victim could be connected to him, but there was no direct proof, no clear timeline match, no physical evidence linking him to the crime. Wilder himself was killed in a shootout in the mid-1980s. If he knew anything, he took it with him. Investigators quietly checked more than 60 known killers and violent offenders against the Caledonia case. Every time a new serial predator was arrested, they pulled out the Jane Doe file and asked, could it be him? Again and again, the answer was no, or we cannot prove it. By the early 2000s, three things were clear. She almost certainly came from a warmer region, probably in the South or the West. She had likely been hitchhiking or traveling, taking rides with strangers. Traditional 1970s detective work was not enough to tell them who she was. So they tried something bold. In the mid-2000s, Sheriff York and his team decided to exhume her body. After roughly 25 years in the ground, they would place her remains in the hands of 21st-century forensic science. With a court order, they carefully brought her up from Greenmount Cemetery. From her bones and teeth, experts extracted DNA and built a genetic profile. It did not immediately give them a name, but it meant this: if a relative of hers ever had DNA entered into the right system, the computer could make the connection. It was like lighting a beacon in the dark. They also did something very unusual for that time. They sent her clothing to a forensic pollen specialist. At a lab in Texas, a scientist examined microscopic grains of pollen embedded in the fibers of her clothes. Pollen, it turns out, is stubborn. It clings. Even decades later, those tiny grains can tell you where someone has been. Some of the pollen matched the general region in New York, but some did not belong there at all. There was spruce and birch pollen that matched species found in certain California mountain regions. And there was something even more distinctive: pollen from Australian pine, an invasive tree that does not grow in upstate New York. In the United States, Australian pine grows in warm places like southern Florida, parts of southern Texas, and specific parts of California. It cannot survive harsh northern winters, which meant that at some point before her death, the girl had definitely been in one of those warmer regions where those trees grow, and those grains had gotten into her clothing. When you combine that with her deep tan and bikini tan lines, the picture sharpened. She was almost certainly a southern or southwestern girl. Later, isotopic testing of her teeth and bones reinforced this. Her chemical signature looked like someone who grew up drinking water and eating food from the southern or southwestern United States. She was not a New York farm kid who never left home. She had traveled a long way. Around this time, a volunteer forensic artist named Carl Koppelman took on her case. Using morgue photos, skull measurements, and autopsy notes, he created a color portrait of what she might have looked like in life. A teenage girl with feathered light brown hair, warm brown eyes, and soft features. In his drawing, she wears the red jacket and turquoise necklace. That portrait was uploaded to NamUs, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Now, instead of living only in a local file, her information and face were publicly available online. That is when another force entered the picture: the internet. True crime fans, late-night forum posters, amateur sleuths. On message boards like Web Sleuths and the Doe Network, people started threads about this unidentified girl from Caledonia. They shared her sketch, her measurements, her clothing, the heart and key keychain, the diner meal, the witness description of the man in the tan station wagon. They nicknamed her Cali Doe and refused to let her vanish into obscurity. Some members dove into pollen science and maps. Others combed through old newspaper archives and missing teenager lists from the 1970s. People proposed theories. Maybe she was a Florida runaway whose family never reported her properly. Maybe she was a California hitchhiker. Maybe she had been in foster care. At the same time, in Florida, one of her old friends was wondering where she had gone. Decades after that rainy November morning, a woman named Laurel, who had gone to school with a girl named Tammy, started thinking about her again. With social media reconnecting people, Laurel tried to look her up. No profiles, no obvious records of an adult woman with that name, just silence. It felt wrong. Laurel eventually tracked down Tammy's half-sister, Pamela. She asked if anyone had heard from Tammy since the late 1970s. The answer was no. Their mother, Barbara, who had struggled with prescription drug addiction and violent mood swings, had died in the late 1990s. In her obituary, Tammy had been listed as deceased, even though there was no proof. After so many silent years, the family had simply come to assume she had died somewhere out there. When Laurel and Pamela checked with the local sheriff's office, they learned something infuriating. There was no active missing person record for Tammy. If one had ever been filed back then, it had been misplaced or never entered correctly. As far as national systems were concerned, Tammy had never officially been missing. So, in the summer of 2014, nearly 35 years after she vanished, the Hernando County Sheriff's Office finally created a proper, modern missing person case for Tammy Jo Alexander. They entered her details into NamUs. They uploaded her high school yearbook photo. And that is when her path crossed again with Carl, the artist. If you are still with me, and this story has you wrapped up like it has me, take a second to like this video if you have not already. It tells the algorithm that stories like Tammy's matter and need to be seen. And make sure you subscribe to Dark Case Desk with all notifications on so you do not miss future deep dives like this. Now, back to the moment everything changed. When Tammy's missing person profile went live in late 2014, Carl was doing what he often did in his free time, scrolling through new entries, comparing faces. The instant he saw Tammy's yearbook photo, he froze. She was a teenage girl from Florida who had gone missing in the same general time frame his Jane Doe had been found. She had wavy light brown hair, the face shape, the eyes, the smile, it all echoed the reconstruction he had created of Cali Doe. He had spent hours staring at that unidentified face while drawing her. It was burned into his memory. Seeing Tammy's photo triggered something in him that said, "That is her." He did not ignore it. In September, he emailed his contacts at the Livingston County Sheriff's Office in New York. In the email, he laid out why he believed the new missing girl from Florida, Tammy Jo Alexander, was their Jane Doe. He also copied NamUs administrators in Hernando County in Florida. For investigators in New York, who had been chasing dead ends for decades, it must have felt surreal. An unpaid volunteer from across the country was emailing to say, "I think I've found your girl." But the match made sense. Tammy had disappeared from a warm state. She had a history of hitchhiking. Her age fit. Her photo matched the face they had been staring at for years. Investigators contacted Pamela and asked if she would provide a DNA sample. She agreed. Using mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal lines, scientists compared Pamela's DNA to the DNA taken from the girl exhumed years earlier in New York. In early 2015, the results came back. They matched. The unidentified girl in the cornfield was Tammy Jo Alexander, 16 years old when she died. After notifying the family, law enforcement held a press conference in January of that year. Sheriff Thomas Doherty and former Sheriff John York announced that after more than 35 years, Caledonia's Jane Doe had been identified. For officers who had worked the case since 1979, it was emotional. For years, they had visited her grave, wondered about her life, and hoped for a break that never seemed to come. Now, finally, they knew who she was and where she came from. For Pamela, the news was both relief and heartbreak. She had always held on to a small fantasy that maybe Tammy had gotten the life they never had growing up, maybe a stable home, a partner, kids. Learning that her little sister had been murdered as a teenager, shot and left in a cornfield, was devastating. Livingston County moved quickly to correct the grave. The old headstone that read, "Unidentified Girl," was removed. A new one was placed, bearing Tammy's full name and dates. On a day in June, about 100 people gathered at Greenmount Cemetery for a ceremony. There were locals who had left flowers over the years. There were officers and staff who had worked the case. There were family members and friends from Florida. And there was Carl, the artist who first spotted the match. Together, they unveiled a stone that finally said, Tammy Jo Alexander. The identification became a textbook example of how modern forensic science, centralized databases, and dedicated online sleuths can solve cases that once seemed impossible. It showed why it is critical for families to file missing person reports and to make sure those reports are entered into systems like NamUs. Without that, the computer can never connect the dots. If Laurel had not gone looking for Tammy, if Pamela had not filed a new missing person report, if Carl had not been watching NamUs, if Sheriff York had not preserved the evidence and exhumed her for DNA, Tammy might still be Caledonia Doe today. But one huge question remained. Identifying Tammy answered the question of who. It did not answer the question of who did this. With her identity finally in hand, investigators shifted focus. They began to reconstruct her final months, hoping to find the person who killed her. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined in. Billboards with Tammy's photo went up across multiple states, appealing especially to truckers and long-distance travelers. Tips started to come in. One truck driver in Tennessee contacted authorities with a memory from that era he believed was relevant. Investigators have never publicly released the full details, but they called it significant. They also dug deeper into Tammy's time at the youth ranch in Georgia, looking at who else had been there, who might have crossed paths with her again later on the road. By 2016, they had identified 3 male persons of interest who had known Tammy before her death. They tracked those men down and collected DNA from each. That DNA was compared to an unknown male profile found on Tammy's clothing. None of them matched. Those men may still be part of her story in other ways, but they are unlikely to be the ones who physically killed her, at least not the ones who left that trace. That leaves one figure looming over the case: the unknown man in the tan station wagon. A white man of average height, curly hair, black wire rim glasses, driving a tan station wagon in western New York in late 1979, eating a late meal with a teenage girl at a small diner, then, very likely, driving her out to a dark cornfield and shooting her twice. To this day, he has never been publicly identified. He could have been local. He could have been a traveler who passed through, committed this crime, and went back to an entirely different part of the country. He might have gone on to harm others. Or he might have lived the rest of his life in utter normalcy, carrying this secret as his own private ghost. Officially, Tammy's case is now a solved identification and an unsolved homicide. One half of the mystery has been answered, the other half is still waiting. As we wrap this story, I want to come back to what this channel, Disturbed Intent, is really about. These are not just creepy stories for entertainment. These are real lives. Real teenagers like Tammy, who laughed with their friends, made risky decisions, and tried to escape pain in the only way they knew how, by running. Tammy's life did not end in that cornfield. It ended when someone decided she was disposable. When someone pulled a trigger, dragged her into the mud, and walked away believing she would never be identified. For more than 3 decades, that person was right. But then a sheriff refused to forget. A sister and a friend refused to accept silence. An artist refused to stop looking at faces. And an entire community of internet sleuths refused to let the case sink into obscurity. Tammy got her name back. She got a headstone that is truly hers. She got her story told. What she has not gotten yet is justice. If you are watching this and you grew up in Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, New York, or anywhere along those routes in the late 1970s, think back. Do you remember a teenage girl named Tammy who hitchhiked, who talked about running off to see the world? Do you remember a man with curly hair and black wire-rimmed glasses, driving a tan station wagon, hanging around truck stops and diners? Sometimes, the smallest memory is the missing piece in an unsolved murder. If you know anything that might matter, you can contact the Livingston County Sheriff's Office, your local law enforcement agency, or submit a tip through the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or NamUs. Tammy deserved far better than the life she got, and she absolutely deserved better than the way it ended. We cannot change what happened, but we can make sure her story is not erased. If you made it this far, thank you for spending your time and attention on Tammy's story. Please like this video, not because you enjoyed the tragedy, but because it pushes this case in front of more eyes. Leave a comment with your thoughts, your theories, or simply Tammy's name so the algorithm knows people still care. And if you want more deep dives into cold cases, unsolved murders, and the people who refuse to let them go, hit the subscribe button and turn on all notifications. This has been Disturbed Intent. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, somewhere out there, someone knows the truth.